to predict every record of every team in the SEC for 2026. This could also get pretty spicy. And we're going to go in random order here. I'm going to start off with the Texas Longhorns. The Texas Longhorns have the third toughest strength of schedule in the country. Now, if you're Rhett Lashley and you're the head coach at SMU, you're not too fond of preseason strength of schedule metrics because, and I get the sentiment. He basically says that we don't know what any team is going to be for 2026 because no games have been played. So how can you determine that this team has the third toughest strength of schedule? It's basically just going off of how the team was last year. And I know a lot of things change from year to year. But for Texas, they have games versus Ohio State at home in week 2. They're at Tennessee in week 4. They have a bye week. Then they have Oklahoma, neutral site in Dallas. They have Florida, Ole Miss. They're at Missouri. They're at LSU, and they're at Texas A&M. That is a complete meat grinder of a schedule. However, I would like to remind those of you that are listening live and those of you that may be listening later on the podcast that schedules are not teams. And I like to use this example. Let's say the Super Bowl favorite this year, the Los Angeles Rams. If I were to take the Los Angeles Rams and demote them to college football, and I were to drop them, let's say I drop them in the Pac-12, the newly renovated Pac-12, the Los Angeles Rams would have a very easy strength of schedule compared to what Texas has to play this year. And Los Angeles, they're going to go undefeated most likely. But just because their strength of schedule is easy doesn't determine how good the team is, because at the end of the day, they're still the Los Angeles Rams. I think the same applies to Texas, because if Texas is as good as the roster is, at least on paper, then they should be fine despite the tough schedule. And I said at the beginning of the show that I think Texas is a national championship contender this year. I still believe that. So I have Texas going 10-2 this year, just because I believe the day and age of going undefeated, and when you expand to 9 conference games, plus you play a Power 4 opponent in the non-con, I think the day and age of teams going undefeated in this league, very slim. Very, very slim. Not saying that it couldn't happen. It's just very slim. I have Texas going 10-2. Now, if they go 10-2, and let's say maybe that loss, one of those losses is to Ohio State, well, that still may be good enough to get you in the SEC championship game. And if you win the SEC, maybe you get a first-round bye in the college football playoff. Just saying. Moving on to the Georgia Bulldogs. This is viewed as tier 1 of the SEC. Georgia's schedule is obviously not as tough as Texas's is. I have them going 11-1 because I trust Kirby Smart. I trust Gunnar Stockton, their quarterback, his ability to perform in big games, regardless of how good you think he is at quarterback. He performed in big games last year. He performed against Florida, performed against Tennessee, performed against Alabama in the SEC championship, made some plays. So the floor of this roster is good enough for them to go 11-1. That's truly what I believe. Moving on to LSU and Lane Kiffin. I did my college football playoff predictions the other day, and I had LSU in the playoff. Now, just because the college football playoff has not adjusted their criteria, meaning they haven't adjusted their strength of schedule metrics, they don't heavily focus on that as much as they focus at what your actual record is. So I don't foresee a 9-3 team getting into the college football playoff. So that means there are no 9-3 teams. You have to be 10-2 or better. I do think LSU is going to be a playoff contender. I have them going 10-2. They have tough games, though. They have Clemson in week 1. They're at Ole Miss in week 3. The next week, they have Texas A&M. They're at Auburn. They have Alabama, Texas. Both of those games are at home, though. They're at Tennessee. That's a tough schedule. I still have them going 10-2. I really like the roster that they have in Baton Rouge. I'm going to talk about Baton Rouge a little bit later, by the way. Ole Miss, also in my playoff predictions, at least the 1.0 version. We'll see about 2.0. I do not think Ole Miss is going to replicate what they did last year in the regular season. They went 11-1. I think that's hard to replicate. I do not think the roster is really all that worse. I think it's better. It might be slightly better. Trinidad Chambliss, I think he's the most dangerous player in college football. I don't think there's a better quarterback, running back duo in the country than Trinidad Chambliss and Kewan Lacey. I think their schedule's tougher than it was last year. You have LSU in there. You're at Florida. You're at Vanderbilt. You have Missouri. You're at Texas. You have Auburn, Georgia. You're at Oklahoma. I don't want to gloss over that Louisville game in week 1, neutral site in Nashville, which, by the way, I'll be there. So I'll have coverage from that. It's just one of those deals where, looking at the schedule, I think 10-2 is fair. And if you're 10-2, probably get in the playoff. Alabama, I think Alabama's missing the playoff this year. I do. The good news is they're going to be starting. Well, this isn't good news, but could be. I'm very high on both of these players, whoever's starting at quarterback for Alabama, between Austin Mack and Keelan Russell. I've been on the record as saying I think it's going to be Keelan Russell. Now, it may not be Keelan Russell week 1 to start, but eventually I think he'll take over as the starter. Maybe Austin Mack to start out. We'll see. Regardless of who's at quarterback, they're both talented, both very talented. Alabama could be 5-0 by the time they play Georgia in week 6 on October 10th. They have East Carolina. They're at Kentucky, Florida State, South Carolina, at Mississippi State. With the talent roster edge that Alabama has in those games, they should be 5-0. They should be 5-0 by the time they play Georgia. Even if Alabama doesn't make the playoff this year, don't think Kalen DeBoer's getting fired, and I stand by that. I have Alabama going 9-3, and I have them missing the college football playoff. Let's go to the next team on the list. It is Texas A&M. I didn't have Texas A&M mentioned in my college football playoff. They went 11-1 in the regular season. It's just hard for me to see that happening again this year. There is some turnover on the offensive line. They have to replace four starters from last year's team, so 4 new starters on that offensive line. Marcel Reed, he played good towards the end of the regular season, but they have a new offensive coordinator. Colin Klein has taken the head coaching job at Kansas State, his alma mater. What does that look like? I trust the defense under Mike Elko, but I will say the run defense wasn't great last year. They gave up 130.8 yards rushing, which ranked 8th in the SEC and 40th nationally, so that's going to have to improve. I think a fair record for Texas A&M this year is 9-3. So I have them going 9-3, just on the outside looking in of the college football playoff. With Oklahoma, I also have Oklahoma missing the playoff. They're one of those teams, though, that I just wanted to find a way. I just wanted to find a way to get them into the college football playoff, but I was racking my brain trying to scratch out every win that I could for them on their schedule, even with a presumably healthy John Mateer, which a fully healthy John Mateer for a whole season, I see as a Heisman Trophy candidate. Again, I don't have any worries about the defense as long as Brent Venables is there, but they got to pair that with the run. They can't just be throwing the football. They have to be able to have some sort of run game. Am I guaranteed to get that? After last year, it was pretty bad. The run game was pretty non-existent. What does that look like? Just a question mark as right now. I have Oklahoma going 9-3 and also missing the playoff. But that could change. I'm releasing a college football playoff prediction 2.0. That'll be the final version pretty soon. What about the Florida Gators? What does a successful season look like in year 1 under John Sumrall? I would say bowl eligibility is certainly a good way to start. Now, you guys know, at least those of you that have been listening for a while, that I'm really high on this Florida team. Just because I'm high on him doesn't guarantee him wins on the field, as we know. But if you go through this roster, which I have several times, it is a top 25 roster in college football. It is a top 25 roster in college football. Plus, I have faith that John Summerall is going to build a winner in Gainesville. He's built winners everywhere he goes. Now, I know that he's never coached in the SEC before, but if you're a good football coach, that should automatically translate. Plus, you'll have more resources to work with than you had at Tulane, than you had at Troy. Now, I have Florida going 6-6 this year. I have Florida going 6-6, getting to a bowl in year one under John Summerall. I'd consider that a success. But the future of Florida, very high on as long as John Summerall is there. So Florida may be better than 6-6, but that's just what I see. Tennessee, what are we expecting for Tennessee this year? We know the quarterback situation, either going to be George McIntyre or Faison Brandon. The starter has not been named. And knowing Josh Heupel, like I think I know Josh Heupel, I would expect him to get as close to week one versus Furman as possible before naming a starter. He may even go into that game playing both of them before declaring a starter. Now, I think you have to have your starter figured out by week 2 when you go to Georgia Tech. Tough schedule for Tennessee this year, right? You're at Georgia Tech in week 2. You have Texas in there. You have Auburn. Both of those games are in Neyland. You have Alabama. That game also in Neyland. I'm not going to just gloss over the fact that they have to travel to Columbia, South Carolina. Tennessee has struggled playing in Columbia, South Carolina, and especially if that game's at night, very hostile environment. You have to go to Texas A&M. You have LSU, and then you end the year at Vanderbilt. 8-4 is where I have Tennessee. I don't really have a lot of question marks on this roster outside of quarterback. I guess one of the other big question marks I have is how quickly is this defense able to get on the other side of the learning curve with Jim Knowles' defense? Because from a historical standpoint, it takes defenses about 2 years to get the Jim Knowles system fully implemented. But Jim Knowles brought over guys with him from Penn State to help expedite that curve. So I have Tennessee going 8-4. For Missouri, just talked about Eli Drinkwitz and how I think he's done a great job maximizing that roster. Ahmad Hardy is back at running back. He did have the situation happen in the offseason where he was shot in the leg, but I expect him to be a full go by the time the season gets here. He was the top 3 leading rusher in college football last year. Austin Simmons is going to be their quarterback, transfer from Ole Miss. Remember, Austin Simmons was good enough to win the starting job over Trinidad Chambliss last year, or at least Lane Kiffin thought so. But with how good Trinidad Chambliss did, you're not gonna bench a guy like that. So Austin Simmons transfers to Missouri, but the rest of the roster, is it on par with some of the upper echelon teams in the SEC? I don't know. I have Missouri going 7-5 in 2026, which would get them back to a bowl game. For Vanderbilt, how are they able to respond after the season that they had last year? We all know that they're going to have a new quarterback. Diego Pavia is gone. Jared Curtis is the guy that I think is going to start, although some are saying that there's a legitimate quarterback competition going on between him and Blaise Berlowitz. I just have this gut feeling you're paying Jared Curtis all this money. You're not gonna sit him. So I think Jared Curtis is going to win the job. I think Vanderbilt has one of the best 1-2 punches at running back, not just in the SEC, but in the country, with Cedric Alexander and MK Young. And I don't know why they don't get talked about more. They have to replace 4 starters on the offensive line, but I trust their evaluation. Bart Simmons and the crew. Clark Lee has talked about the overall depth of this team, how it feels like it's better than last year. Ricardo Jones is a name that you're going to want to familiarize yourself with. He's a safety transfer from Clemson, had 6 interceptions last year, which was tied for second in the country. So I feel good about this overall roster. But if it's Jared Curtis, there's going to be a learning curve. There is. It's just part of college football. It just happens. So Vanderbilt, I have them going 7-5. I have them going 7-5. I think that's fair if you have a true freshman starting at quarterback. For Auburn, I got to go quick here. I have Auburn going 6-6. Bowl eligibility in year one for Alex Golesh would be a success. There is a world out there in which Auburn starts the season 5-0. They have Baylor, Southern Miss, Florida, Vanderbilt. Three of those games are at home, but for some reason they're playing the Baylor game in Atlanta because it's news to me that neither of these teams have game on actual home campuses. You know how I feel about neutral site games. And then they're at Tennessee. So there is a world, although unlikely, that Auburn is 5-0 by the time they play at Georgia between the hedges. Let's move on. We got to move quick. Got some more things to get to. Kentucky. I've been high on Will Stein, and I'm going to continue to be high on Will Stein. Just maybe not this year. I have Kentucky going 5-7, just missing a bowl game. But as long as Will Stein's there, I feel good about the future of Kentucky. Very good recruiter. Brought in a highly ranked transfer portal class. Kentucky may be better than 5-7, for all I know. South Carolina. I have South Carolina returning to a bowl game. They go 6-6. I just have a lot of question marks on this roster outside of Lenore Sellers. Is he going to have to put on the cape? And if so, how much is he going to have to put on the cape? They have Nick Harbor at receiver, a freak, an alien out there catching passes for Lenore Sellers. And then on the other side, the line of scrimmage on the defensive line, they have Dylan Stewart, who is a projected top 5 pick in next year's NFL draft. But outside of that, I just don't know. I'm not sure about the overall roster. But they have a new offensive coordinator by the name of Kendall Briles, who was at TCU last year. I like that pairing with Lenore Sellers. But how much is Lenore Sellers going to have to kind of shoulder that load? That's a question that I have. Moving on, we're getting to the bottom of the SEC here. Mississippi State. If you're Brandon Walker and you're listening to the show, I'm just going to ask that you cover your ears right here. Brandon Walker has been on the record of saying that he thinks Mississippi State is going to go 8-4 this year. To which I respond, drugs. That's evidence of drug use. But again, Brandon Walker, cover your ears. I have Mississippi State going 5-7 this year. That's what they went in 2025. Very high on Jeff Lebby. Love Jeff Lebby. I'm openly rooting for Jeff Lebby. I just do not see it this year. I just don't. I think Jeff Lebby's done a fine job. They could impress depending on how good their quarterback play is with Kamaro Taylor. I could easily see him get into a bowl game. I just think it's going to be 5-7. Again, there's a world they might be able to start 4-0. They're at Southern Miss, or excuse me, they have Louisiana Monroe. They're at Minnesota in week 2, which is a very interesting matchup that I have circled. They're at South Carolina, and they have Missouri. Long shot that they're 4-0 by the time they welcome in Alabama to town, but it's out there. I'm just going to toss that around. And then Arkansas. I like Ryan Silverfield. I just don't know what to make of the hire because there's so much behind the scenes that has to be aligned for Arkansas. They went 2-10 last year. It's hard for them to be much worse than that. I have them being slightly better, 3-9. I just don't know what to make. I just know there's a lot of work to be done at Arkansas. So I have them going 3-9 this year.